and you turn a handle, and there would a cog go up like on a coal oil, old-time coal oil drum at the store, you know, and draw 2 gallons. Mr. Peterson put one in front of the store, and it had a 5-gallon glass up there, and you had a big lever down the bottom, you'd pump it up. And he bought J.D. a car, and I think at the time it was an Oval, a pretty good-sized car. And I was there one evening in front, and J.D. drove up and putting some gas in it. And Mr. Peterson come out, and he said, "Now, son," he said, "I want you to not drive that car over 15 miles an hour. And if you're going down the road, and you see a bareheaded man coming up the road in another car," he said, "you pull over and stop and let him by." And at that time, everybody wore hats, you know, but then some of these smart ones, people, you know, was going bareheaded. I remember that. And not drive that car over 15 miles an hour. He used to have motorcycles in it? Yeah, and he flew an airplane. I remember one time they arrested him for it. I don't know what they did, but he cut the tops off some trees there in the courthouse. A bunch of men was sitting in under there. He would go over on the Tennessee River and the Agnes Ferry Bridge, and he'd fly under the bridge where the boats run, that bridge in the water. Somebody said that his mother was talking about J.D. said he was drunk and flying. He said, "Well, thank the Lord, if he's flying, if he's in the car, I'd be afraid or something." Yeah. She was an April, and I remember her very well. Mr. Peterson, too. Mr. Peterson was raised up in Callaway County, out about 2 miles southeast of Oak Grove Church, and every Sunday morning he'd hitch his horse to a buggy. He had a buggy with stick-back seat on it, and it didn't have a top on it, but he had a parasol, so it was hot. And he'd go up there and see his mother and his sister every Sunday. Mr. Peterson would go up in his house between Wadesboro and out in Callaway County, about 2 miles out from the Oak Grove Church. Well, I've heard a lot of old stories back in the old days, and people would actually not give a man a nickel. I mean, he starved to death. Do you think people are getting better or worse? Yes, I think it's different. Back at that time, if you had a neighbor, you'd give him a little something, but there wasn't any relief, there wasn't any food stamps, there wasn't anything. I've seen men, grown men 40, 50 years old, come to my shop barefooted, and have a shirt on, patch on top of patch, and a pair of overalls had been washed as white as a bed sheet. You could buy a pair of overalls for $1, but if you didn't have $1, I remember one time after I married, and I had a great big kid, didn't have a pair of shoes fit to wear to church. And I walked from Benton to Jimmy Houser's. I heard he'd been to St. Louis, and I found a pair of shoes there that fit me, a pair of slippers, tan slippers. And I got them and paid him for them as $1.50. And then I paid him, I had 50 cents left, and I walked every step of the way back to Benton. I bought a pair of shoes a while back, and they charged me $32 for them, and I had the money to pay for them. They talk about the good old times. I'd rather pay $32, doctor, for a pair of shoes. Yeah, I had $32 to pay for it than to give $1.50 and walk 5 miles and have 50 cents left.
Wife of Clyde Eugene Anderson, half-brother of Flora Anderson, wife of John A. Henson, interviewing John Elmas Henson, age 96, in his home on Route 8 near Walnut Grove Church of Christ on Sunday afternoon, March the 26th, 1977. Okay, Uncle John, I wanted you to talk to us about hunting, like deer hunting or turkey hunting. Can you think of any times that you went turkey hunting, and tell us how you called the turkeys and how you had to find them or anything?
I turkey hunted and deer hunted for 3 years in the state of Arkansas. I have killed them going and coming. I was 13 years of age.
What kind of call did you use when you went turkey hunting?
I used a collar that we made out of a piece of a horn. Cut it out and took a nail and scraped on that horn.
You mean a cow horn or what
Yeah.
kind of horn?
Yes. And if you knew how to scrape, it would go like a turkey hen, a calling. And if you were anywhere near a drove of turkeys, there'd be an old gobbler stick his head up. You wouldn't know it until he were close to you. All you had to do was to shoot him.
Well, how did you find them? Like, did you go the night before and find where they roosted and then go back the next morning, or how did you all?
They just roosted anywhere. There were so many of them that they had no certain place. They just went in droves. In big woods, thousands of acres.
Oh, yeah. Did you ever hunt in western Kentucky? Turkey hunting in western Kentucky?
I never did turkey hunt any in Kentucky at all. I've never been between the lakes. I had a right to go one time when I was sick and could not go.
But turkey hunting, I guess, would be turkey hunting no matter what state, wouldn't it? No matter what state you were hunting in. Well, how did you hunt your deer? Did you build a stand like they do in a tree now?
No. I just went out in the big woods like everybody else. Way out 2 or 3 miles from anybody. Take your stand out there by a tree or something place to hide and just stand there. You couldn't walk around and ever find a deer. They can see too. Just stand there. Finally, they might be one come along that day, and they might not. If they didn't, you didn't get no deer. But you'd go back the next day, and you'd take your stand, and one would come along inside. All you had to do was shoot him.
Where did you try to aim? Where did you try to aim?
Right behind his front leg. Shoot him right through the heart.
What kind of rifle did you have then?
A 44 Winchester rifle.
Single shot?
16 shot.
16 shot. Well, that was before 1900 too, wasn't it? You were 13 years old?
That was in 1893.
Well,
I was born 1881. 5 miles east of Benton, on a place that my great-grandfather homesteaded from the government. Gave it to his boy, Philip Goodbread Henson, my grandfather, and he gave it to my father. And in 1892, in October, he took a notion to go to Arkansas and buy him a lot of that cheap land. Could get it for 50 cents and $1 an acre, and homestead 160 acres for $5. We stayed there 3 years. He took pneumonia and died on my birthday, 2nd day of March, 1895.
Well, how long did you stay in Arkansas after your father?
3 years.
After he died?
Immediately after he died, we had to sell everything we had, leave the land. It was all in the woods, and come home, back to Kentucky at our old home.
Well, he didn't sell this before he went to Arkansas then.
He kept his place here, and we had a home to come back to. We had no choice. We had to come. The closest neighbors we had there would be probably 3/4 of a mile, from that to 2 miles apart, and every person were for himself. So we had to come home. We had no choice.
Well, how did your family survive with...
By my hard work. I made a crop the year I was 14 years old when we came home. I made enough to live on and feed the horse, cow, and a hog, and feed myself, my mother, and 3 younger brothers, and we would swap corn or flour to have our biscuits.
When your family decided to go to Missouri, how did you all travel?
We traveled in a wagon, a covered wagon drawn by a yoke of fine oxen, weigh 1,000 or 1,200 pounds apiece.
How'd you cross the river? Did you go down by Paducah?
No, we went to Columbus. The first night we camped inside of Mayfield. The next night between Fancy Farm and Arlington. The next night on top of the hill from Columbus Ferry. The next morning we drove down to the ferry. The boat was on the Missouri side. My daddy rang a big bell there, and the boat came across after us, pulled by 3 big niggers with oars, and 2 were dipping the water out of it. My mammy balked there. She wouldn't go on it. She said, "I'll not go on that thing, neither will my children." My dad didn't say a word. He was afraid of it too. So he just pulled up the river to Wycliffe, and we camped at Wycliffe. The next morning we drove down to the ferry. There's a big steamboat sitting there, and we drove on. Some man drove 30 or 40 head of cattle right on that thing, and they crossed to Cairo. They put the cattle off at Cairo and carried us across the Mississippi River to Bird's Point, Missouri.
Well, then where did you go from there?
We went 5 miles out in a nigger wool swamps, and we had to camp. Us boys raked that nigger wool. That was just moss. The ground was so rich it was a foot deep, looked just like nigger hair. And we would rake that off, and we picked up a sack full of paper shell pecans, the finest things you ever saw.
So how long did you stay in the nigger wool swamps?
We camped 1 night there. The next morning, we went to Charleston, Missouri, and camped. The next night, we camped in Saxton, Missouri, right in what is now the heart of Saxton, Missouri. My mother sent me to a grocery store up there to buy a couple of loaves of bread. She gave me a quarter. And I went to the store and bought the bread, and the man said, "I'll sell you 6 of those loaves for that quarter." And I bought 6 of them, about the size that I give a $50 for 1 loaf now. Probably more. We stayed there all night and left the next morning and we camped right in the edge of the San Francisco River bottom after we passed through Dexter, Missouri. There we camped. The people there told my dad the next morning that the only way that we could go to an old German's house were to follow 3 hacks on the trees, and it would carry us 20 miles to this settlement. The settlement was an old German, weighed a couple of 100 pounds, and his wife larger, and his son-in-law and his wife. And there we camped again. It started into raining, and about a little after dark, it just poured the rain. The old gentleman came out to our tent and tried to tell my mother to carry us children to the house. Couldn't understand a word he said, but he made signs, and Mother took us children and we went to his house. Went in, a dirt floor with every kind of hide that you could think of fastened down on that ground some way. That was it. After a while, the old lady got a quilt and spread out on the hides, and us kids went to bed, and I went to sleep. And her still a-talking. She would just talk and laugh because Mother couldn't understand anything she would say. They woke me up the next morning. It had quit raining, and she was still talking and laughing. Well, Mother took us kids and we went back to the tent. She cooked our breakfast, and the old man came out and told my daddy that he would never find the way to the ford that crossed the San Francisco River. It was called the Muscle Shoals. But for $1, his son-in-law would go and show him the way to the ferry. It was 8 miles. My daddy paid him the $1 and we lit out. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we came to the ford. It had rained upstream and the river was muddy. And the man said, "This river is higher than I have ever saw it at this time of year." He said, "It might run in your wagon bed." And I think it did. My daddy drove off into the river with that yoke of oxen. They went clean out of sight. We had 2 sets of sideboards on the wagon. It went over the top of them, and them cattle pulled that wagon walking on the bottom of the river, I would say for 20 feet, and they reared straight up on their hind feet and blew the water out of their nostrils, pulled it a little while on their hind feet and went down again. They pulled on. In a little while they came up and went through the same thing. They blew that water out of their head. They went down again. My daddy thought that they were drowned, but they were walking on the bottom of the river. They reared up on their hind feet and pulled that wagon something like 10 feet and went down again, but they struck the bottom. And they pulled that wagon out on the other side of the river. We were soaking wet, and everything we had were wet except the feather beds. Dad had thrown them up on top of everything else, and they didn't get wet. There we camped. Took everything out of the wagon, wrung the water out of it, built a big fire, stayed there all day the next day and dried the things out. And then we left. We drove all day and camped somewhere, just out there in the woods in the big bottom. I don't know where, nobody else don't. We started the next day and we drove till about noon, and we came to a little place. There's 5 or 6 houses, and we had to cross another river. But there were a ferry boat there. Our rope stretched from one side, tied to a tree, and carried to the other side and tied to a tree. A big cable rope. It took 2 men to put that boat across the river. One in one end, one in the other. They'd hold of that rope and pull it across, anchor it, and drive off, and you were on the other side. If anybody came and wanted it, there was a skiff there. They'd have to go over there and get it. It is left on the other side. And there we were.
What was the name of that river, you remember?
I don't remember what the name of that river was.
It wasn't the Arkansas River.
No, I guess the name of that was Black River. I wouldn't say it was. I don't know. It appears to me like it was Cash. C-A-S-H. I forgot. Anyway, we camped over on the other side, stayed all night, drove the next day, all day, and camped out in the woods, and drove all day the next day and came to a man's house. And there we camped. Just wait a minute.
When you got to this clearing and the man lived there, you camped, what'd you do after that? Was this where you bought land or land homesteaded?
The gentleman came out to our tent where we camped, and it had a house right close, not over 50 yards. And he told my daddy that there were corn in that house. It had come a snow that night, 3 inches deep. And if we would go and throw that corn back in the back of the house, he'd go with us, and we could move in that house till the weather got better. We went and threw the corn back in the back of the house and moved in.
What kind of fireplace did it have?
Had a stick and dirt chimney built out of mud with sticks put around to hold it up. Mud and that gumbo grass. And that was it.
What'd you all eat? Did everything you ate, even when you were crossing this river and almost drowned, got wet, even your meal and so on?
Everything we had when we crossed the river got wet.
Well, how did you preserve it, or how did you have anything to eat?
When we got to this little place, before we crossed the other river, there was a grocery store there, a small one, and we bought supplies. And we had plenty when we got to this man's place that let us move in his house. We stayed there about a week and left. We drove all day and camped out on the side of the road. The next day we camped right at some town that we got near, and we camped there. pretty good-sized town. We left the next day and drove to a place called Brooklyn, Arkansas. There were a man there that wanted somebody to haul ties. There were thousands of them that they had made, and they wanted them hauled to the railroad, Iron Mountain Railroad. And my daddy and my oldest brother and everybody else that lived around close went to hauling ties, and they hauled ties all the rest till the weather got so bad they couldn't haul. And the next year, when the weather got good enough to start, they went to hauling again, and they hauled ties till July. We left there and went through Jonesboro, Arkansas. That was a pretty good town then, and it's a good town now. We camped after we left Jonesboro out on the side of the road, and the next day we went across and drove to Hoxie, Arkansas. 2 railroads crossed there. It was a gambling town, and everybody there said it was the meanest place they were in Arkansas, and there were a big sign right across the road that said, "Beware of pickpockets." Now that's not the funny part. There were a streetcar there that ran from Hoxie to Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, a distance of 3 miles. They cut logs and lay on the ground, flat on the ground, split out pieces and nailed to those logs, built them a bus, had big wooden wheels to it like flanges on a railroad car, and it was sitting on that track. The way they got from Hoxie to Walnut Ridge, they took a mule and hitched to one end of it, carry anybody that wanted to go, and they'd haul out to Walnut Ridge. I think it cost 25 cents to get to go that 3 miles. Then they'd get to Walnut Ridge, they'd take the mule out, hitch him to the other end of the bus, and start back to Hoxie. It couldn't run off because it's flat on the ground and pulled by a mule. So that was about the cutest outfit I ever saw.
Did you ever get to ride on it?
No, I never did get to ride on it.
But you'd go out and watch the others get on and watch it take off.
We left there and we went to Walnut Ridge and went through Walnut Ridge and camped outside of Walnut Ridge.
You left there, and where'd you go?
We went to Noble, a place on the Iron Mountain Railroad.
Is that where your father settled? Near there? Is that where your father settled?
That's where we lived when he had to go to Pegoo and file a claim for a homestead right, and he could buy the land from anybody that had it. And we lived at Noble in 1894 on a farm that my dad rented. There were 16 acres in one field. and my father laid it all off in one land. I was 13 years old, and I broke that 16 acres of land with the yoke of cattle that carried us out there, hitched to a 19 Oliver Chill plow. I couldn't turn that plow at the corners, but the oxen would just swing it around, and I broke that 16 acres of land when I was 13 years of age.
Was the land black and loamy, or what type of soil was it?
Oh, the land was just as black as it could be, just as rich as it could be.
What did you all plant? What did you plant in that field?
Plant anything. We planted corn. We raised a lot of beans. And that's all.
What does filing a claim for a homestead involve?
You had to go to the clerk's office and ask for a claim to homestead a piece of land, and they give you a homestead right. The surveyor would go out and lay the homestead off for you. It contained 160 acres. And he would run the lines, and you had to stay on that place one night out of each month and clear 5 acres of land in 5 years and build some kind of a house on it sufficient to live in, and the Commonwealth made you a deed to it.
At the end of the 5 years?
At the end of the 5 years.